Let me begin by saying this clearly. Because clarity is the first act of leadership, the world has always felt like it was ending to the people who were paying attention. Every generation that ever stood at the edge of uncertainty believed they were witnessing the final chapter. And yet here we are, still breathing, still building, still wrestling with the same questions dressed in new clothes. The difference today is not that the world is worse, but that fear has become louder, faster, and more profitable. You turn on the news, scroll your phone, glance at a headline, and within seconds your nervous system is told, this is it, collapse is coming, everything is falling apart. And when that message is repeated often enough, it doesn't just inform you, it shapes you. It changes how you think, how you parent, how you work, how you pray, how you hope. And that is why we must pause right here together and separate end of the world thinking from end of illusion reality. Because many things are ending, but not the things we are afraid of losing. What's ending is the comfort of denial, the luxury of moral laziness, the fantasy that we can live disconnected lives without consequences. Civilizations don't collapse because of earthquakes alone. They collapse because values erode before structures do. When people lose a shared sense of responsibility, when truth becomes negotiable, when convenience replaces conscience, the cracks appear long before the buildings fall. And if you look honestly, deeply, not emotionally, but intelligently, you will see that what we are experiencing is not annihilation. It's exposure. Everything that was hidden is coming to the surface. Every weakness in leadership, every fracture in family, every unresolved trauma in society is now visible. That's not the end, that's a mirror. And mirrors are uncomfortable because they don't lie. They simply reflect what is. Now, here's the psychological danger. When people mistake exposure for destruction, they either panic or disengage. They say, what's the point? It's all going downhill anyway. And that mindset is far more destructive than any external crisis because despair paralyzes initiative. Jim Rohn used to say, we must all suffer from one of two pains, the pain of discipline or the pain of regret. What we are witnessing globally is the accumulated pain of neglected discipline, moral, emotional, spiritual discipline. You don't drift into chaos overnight. You drift there slowly by tolerating small compromises. And the truth you can't ignore is this. History doesn't end because people make mistakes. It ends because people stop taking responsibility for correcting them. But as long as there are individuals willing to stand up, think clearly, and live deliberately, the story is still being written. That's why I reject the question, is the world about to end? And replace it with a far more demanding one. Are we willing to end the behaviors that are destroying it? Because the world doesn't need more prophets of doom. It needs adults. Adults who understand that freedom without values becomes chaos, that progress without purpose becomes emptiness, and that knowledge without wisdom becomes dangerous. The ancient spiritual text never predicted the end as a surprise explosion. They described it as a process, a gradual unraveling that gives humanity countless opportunities to awaken before collapse. And awakening is uncomfortable. It requires humility. It requires saying, maybe the problem isn't out there. Maybe it's here. Right here in how we speak, how we consume, how we treat truth, how we raise children, how we define success. We are not facing the end of time. We are facing the end of pretending that time doesn't matter. Every choice counts again. Every word carries weight again. Every action has consequences again. And that realization terrifies people who are living on autopilot. But for those who are ready, it is the most empowering moment imaginable. Because when illusion dies, responsibility is reborn, and responsibility is where meaning lives. So if you feel the tension in the air, if you sense that something old is dissolving, don't ask, how bad is it going to get? Ask, who do I need to become for this moment? Because history doesn't remember the crowd. It remembers the conscious few who refuse to surrender their values to fear. And here's the simple truth I want to leave you with before we move forward together. The world does not end when things fall apart. It ends when people stop standing up. And as long as you are willing to stand, the story is not over. Now let me take this a little deeper, because once we've stripped away the panic and the noise, once we've calmed the fear that whispers this is the end, we were left with a far more uncomfortable and far more powerful question. If the world is not ending, then why does it feel like everything familiar is collapsing? And this is where truth begins to challenge us, not comfort us. Because what's really happening is not the end of existence, but the end of a certain version of reality that we grew used to. You see, every generation inherits assumptions about stability, about progress, about how life is supposed to work. And when those assumptions break down, the human mind interprets it as catastrophe. We say everything is falling apart. But in wisdom literature, and especially in Jewish thought, collapse is often the sound of something new trying to be born. The Hebrew prophets never panicked when structures shook. They asked what those tremors were calling people to fix. And that's the key distinction. Destruction without meaning is chaos. Disruption with purpose is transformation. History doesn't end when systems fail. History advances when people outgrow systems that no longer serve the soul. Now, think about this personally, because truth always begins at home. You've had moments in your own life where something ended, a job, a relationship, an identity you once relied on. And in that moment, it felt like the end of the world, your world. But looking back, you can see that what ended wasn't life itself, but a chapter that could no longer teach you what you needed to learn next. Humanity is going through that same experience right now, only on a global scale. Our economic models, our political structures, our definitions of success, even our ideas of happiness are being exposed as fragile, shallow, or incomplete. And when illusions collapse, people panic. They mistake the loss of illusion for the loss of hope. But illusion was never hope to begin with. It was comfort without depth, and comfort, when it becomes the highest value, eventually weakens a civilization. Here's something worth thinking about deeply. The greatest danger is not that the world will end, but that we will refuse to grow while it changes. Rabbi Simon Jacobson often speaks about exile not as geography, but as consciousness. Exile is when you live disconnected from your purpose, even if you're physically comfortable. And redemption is not fireworks in the sky, it's alignment between who you are and why you're here. Right now, humanity is experiencing a collective exile of meaning. We are more connected than ever, yet more fragmented inside, more informed than ever, yet less wise, more VO, cal than ever, yet less thoughtful. And this inner contradiction creates anxiety. Anxiety then looks for dramatic explanations. The world is ending. But the truth is more demanding than that. The world is asking us to mature. Let me say this plainly, because clarity is a form of kindness. When old values collapse, it's not punishment, it's exposure. When corruption surfaces, it's not proof that everything is doomed, it's proof that truth is no longer willing to stay hidden. And when people feel overwhelmed by the speed of change, it's not because change is evil, but because growth requires responsibility. Immaturity wants certainty without effort. Maturity accepts uncertainty and chooses meaning anyway. That's the crossroads we're standing at right now. Not the end of days, but the end of excuses. Now, I want you to notice something psychological here. Fear spreads faster than wisdom because fear feels urgent. Wisdom requires patience. And social media has trained us to confuse urgency with importance. Every crisis is framed as absolute, final, catastrophic. But civilizations don't disappear overnight. They erode when people stop asking better questions. The real question is not, how bad is it? The real question is, who are we becoming in response? Because history doesn't judge generations by the problems they faced, but by the character they developed while facing them. In Jewish thought, there's a profound idea that the world is unfinished by design. Creation is not a completed project, it's a partnership. Humanity was invited to participate, to refine, to elevate. That means chaos is not evidence of failure, it's evidence of responsibility. You don't panic when a child struggles to walk. You understand that stumbling is part of learning balance. Humanity is stumbling right now, not because it's dying, but because it's learning to walk at a higher level of seed, consciousness. And learning always looks messy from the outside. But here's where it gets personal again, because it always does. You cannot fix the world if you're at war with your own soul. Collective healing begins with individual integrity. If you consume fear all day, you will speak fear. If you live without purpose, you will project meaninglessness onto the future. But if you anchor yourself in values that are timeless, truth, responsibility, compassion, discipline, then no headline can steal your inner stability. That's not denial, that's strength. Jim Rohn used to say that you don't wish for less problems, you wish for more wisdom. And that's exactly what this moment in history is demanding from us. So when someone asks, is the world about to end? A wiser response might be, which world? The world of unchecked ego? The world of shallow success? The world of comfort without conscience? If that world is ending, maybe it should, because something stronger, more honest, more meaningful cannot emerge until weaker foundations crack. Nature itself works this way. Forest fires clear dead wood so new life can grow. Muscles tear before they rebuild stronger. Growth always looks like breakdown to those who only measure comfort. Let me leave you with this thought as we move forward. The future is not something that happens to us. It is something that responds to us. Panic makes you a spectator. Purpose makes you a participant. The world doesn't need more predictions of doom. It needs more people who live as if their actions matter, because they do. And the greatest truth you can't ignore is this: the end is not coming from the outside. It only comes when people give up on becoming who they were meant to be. Let me take this conversation a little deeper now, because once you understand that fear is not a prophecy and chaos is not the end, the next question becomes unavoidable. Abel, why does it feel so intense right now? Why does it feel as if everything is accelerating, as if the pressure is rising on every level, personal, social, moral, spiritual? And here's the truth most people miss. Pressure does not appear to destroy us. It appears to reveal us. History doesn't collapse in silence. It speaks loudly when it's trying to wake people up. And every era that believed it was witnessing the end of the world was actually standing at the edge of a transition. Not an ending, but a demand for elevation. You see, humanity moves forward the same way individuals do. We grow comfortable, we drift, we compromise, and then life introduces friction. And friction is not punishment. Friction is feedback. When values erode, when truth becomes negotiable, when convenience replaces conscience, tension increases. Not because the universe is cruel, but because reality is precise. The world is not falling apart randomly, it is responding. And that response is asking a very old question in a very loud way: who are you becoming? Every great spiritual tradition teaches this in different language, but the message is identical. Before transformation, there is turbulence. Before clarity, confusion rises. Before growth, discomfort knocks on the door. And if you look closely at the moments we're living in, political instability, moral confusion, technological overload, loneliness in a hyper-connected world, you'll notice something striking. None of these problems are new. What's new is the speed. Everything is happening faster. Information spreads instantly. Fear multiplies in seconds. Outrage travels further than wisdom. And this speed creates the illusion that things are worse than ever. But intensity is not the same as finality. Let me say that again because it matters. Intensity is not the same as finality. A storm is loud, but it's not permanent. A contraction is painful, but it precedes birth. And what we are experiencing now is a contraction of consciousness. Old systems are straining because they no longer match the level of awareness trying to emerge. Old narratives are cracking because they can't contain the complexity of the moment. And when structures that were built for yesterday are forced to carry tomorrow, they shake. Now here's where personal responsibility enters the conversation. Because it's easy to talk about the world. It's harder and more honest to talk about your world. Your habits, your integrity, your thinking, your courage. The world doesn't change from the top down. It changes from the inside out. Every societal shift begins with a psychological shift in individuals who refuse to live unconsciously. And the danger of apocalyptic thinking is that it gives people an excuse to disengage. If everything is ending, why try? If everything is doomed, why build? And that mindset is far more destructive than any external crisis. You see, despair feels intellectual, but it's actually lazy. Hope, on the other hand, demands discipline. It demands that you show up when it would be easier to withdraw. It demands that you live with principle when compromise would be more comfortable. And that's why moments like this separate people, not by wealth, not by status, but by inner strength. Some shrink, others rise, and history remembers the risers. Think about this. Every generation is tested, but not every generation is transformed. Transformation requires people who can hold complexity without losing clarity, people who can see darkness without becoming it, people who understand that spiritual maturity is not about escaping the world, but engaging it with wisdom. The question is not whether the world is ending. The question is whether you are ending your responsibility to grow. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. A collapsing world is not the greatest threat. A collapsing character is. When individuals abandon truth, when they outsource thinking, when they let fear make decisions for them, society weakens from the inside. But when individuals strengthen their values, refine their discipline, and elevate their consciousness, they become anchors in the storm. And storms need anchors more than they need predictions. I want you to notice something powerful. Even now, in the middle of all this noise, people are still building businesses, raising children, creating art, teaching truth, healing others, falling in love, choosing integrity. Life is still happening. Meaning is still being created. Purpose is still calling. That alone should tell you something. If the world were truly ending, life would be retreating, but it isn't. It's pressing forward, demanding better leaders, deeper thinkers, stronger souls. And maybe, just maybe, that's what this era is about. Not destruction, but refinement. Not annihilation, but awakening. Every time humanity reaches a critical point, it's invited to level up or break down. And the choice is never collective at first. It's personal, always personal. What you choose to believe, how you choose to act, the standards you refuse to lower, the courage you're willing to practice daily. So when you hear people say, this is the end, listen carefully. What they're often really saying is, the old way no longer works. And that's not a tragedy, that's an opportunity. Because when the old way collapses, the new way requires builders. And builders are not loud. They're consistent, they're thoughtful, they're grounded. They don't panic, they prepare. Let me leave you with this thought. As we move forward, the world has survived darker moments than this, but only because ordinary people chose extraordinary responsibility. The future does not belong to the fearful, it belongs to the conscious. And the question you must answer is simple, but it's not easy. In a world that feels like it's shaking, will you be someone who trembles, or someone who steadies the ground because history is watching? And more importantly, your own conscience is listening. Let me tell you something very straight, and I say this with respect for your intelligence and your dignity. The world does not end because events happen. The world ends when people stop taking responsibility for who they are becoming. You see, every generation has had its wars, its plagues, its economic collapses, its moral panics, and every generation was convinced that this time it was different. This time the end was near. This time there was no coming back. And yet here we are. Why? Because history is not driven primarily by events. It is driven by human consciousness. What determines whether a crisis becomes a catastrophe or a catalyst is not what happens out there, but what awakens in here. And this is where most people make their most dangerous mistake. They hand over their inner authority to the headlines, to the algorithms, to the loudest voices on social media, to fear merchants who profit from panic. They wait for someone else to tell them how bad things are, how hopeless things are, how angry they should be, how afraid they should feel. And when you outsource your inner life, don't be surprised when you feel empty, powerless, and overwhelmed. Let me put it this way. You cannot build a meaningful future with a borrowed mind. The world is not asking you to predict the end. It is asking you to participate in renewal. But renewal does not begin in governments. It does not begin in institutions. It does not begin in technology. It begins in the quiet, often uncomfortable work of self-examination. Who am I when no one is watching? What values guide my decisions when fear shows up? Do I respond to uncertainty with panic or with purpose? Because here's the truth most people don't want to hear. Chaos exposes character. Pressure does not create weakness, it reveals it. And pressure does not create strength either. It reveals what was already there. That's why some people rise during difficult times while others collapse. Same world, same events, very different inner worlds. And if you're waiting for the world to calm down before you get serious about your life, you're going to be waiting a very long time. Stability has never been a prerequisite for greatness. Meaning has never depended on perfect conditions. In fact, some of the most profound spiritual, intellectual, and moral breakthroughs in human history emerged during times of deep uncertainty. Why? Because uncertainty strips away illusions. It forces us to confront what actually matters. It asks us uncomfortable questions we can no longer avoid. And one of those questions is this: are you living reactively or are you living deliberately? Most people live like emotional weather vanes. If the news is bad, they're anxious. If the market drops, they're hopeless. If society argues, they're angry. Their inner state is entirely dependent on outer conditions. But a mature human being does not live that way. A mature human being develops an inner compass, and that compass is not optimism, it's not denial, it's not blind faith. It's responsibility, responsibly. Thank you says, I may not control the world, but I do control my response to it. I do not choose the era I'm born into, but I choose the values I live by within it. And that choice is everything. Because when enough individuals make that choice, history changes direction. Not dramatically, not overnight, but decisively. Let me be very clear here. Waiting for a savior is one of the oldest forms of escapism. Waiting for the system to fix itself is a form of spiritual laziness. Waiting for the world to make sense before you commit to meaning is a sophisticated excuse for staying small. The world doesn't need more commentators on collapse. It needs more practitioners of responsibility. It needs people who say, I will not let fear define my character. I will not let cynicism erode my values. I will not let chaos steal my humanity. And that starts with how you speak, how you listen, how you treat people who disagree with you, how you handle frustration, how you use your influence, how you show up when things are inconvenient. These are not small things. These are the building blocks of civilization. And here's something else most people miss. Despair feels intellectual, but it's actually emotional. People think pessimism means they're being realistic, when in fact they're often just exhausted, disconnected, and overwhelmed. Hope, real hope, is not naive. It's disciplined. It's the discipline of choosing meaning even when certainty is unavailable. It's the discipline of acting ethically even when shortcuts are tempting. It's the discipline of growth when regression would be easier. And that discipline practiced consistently is what prevents the world from ending, not in some cosmic sense, but in the only sense that really matters, the human sense. Because the end of the world doesn't begin with fire in the sky. It begins when people stop believing their lives matter, their choices matter, their character matters. And I refuse to believe that's where we are. Not if you're listening to this. Not if you're willing to think deeply, act responsibly, and live deliberately. So let me leave you with this. The question is not whether the world is ending. The question is whether you are waking up. And if you are, then I promise you this, the future still has a fighting chance. Here's part 5, written in English, continuing seamlessly from parts 1 to 4. The voice is direct, conversational, authoritative, as if Rabbi Simon Jacobson is standing with a mic, facing a live audience, but delivered with the clarity and motivational rhythm of Jim Rohn. No headings. One continuous, powerful flow. And now we come to the point where everything we've talked about finally meets the ground beneath your feet, because ideas alone don't save a world, people do. Awareness doesn't change history, action does. Insight without responsibility is entertainment, not transformation. So the real question is not whether the world is ending, and it's not even whether humanity is confused or broken, because we've established that struggle is part of the human story. The real question is this: what are you going to do with the moment you've been given? Because every generation is tested, not with the same problems, but with the same question. Will you rise or will you retreat? Will you take ownership or will you outsource your conscience to fear, to leaders, to systems, to excuses? You see, the most dangerous illusion is the belief that someone else will fix what you refuse to face. History does not move because of crowds. It moves because of individuals who decide that neutrality is no longer an option. And that decision, my friends, is made quietly, internally, long before it ever shows up publicly. We live in a time where responsibility has become uncomfortable. We prefer opinions over obligations, reactions over reflection, outrage over accountability. But responsibility is not a burden, it's a privilege. It's the recognition that your choices matter more than your circumstances. Rabbi after rabbi, philosopher after philosopher, teacher after teacher has said the same thing in different words. You are not here by accident, and your life is not small. Even if the world never knows your name, the world is shaped by the decisions you make when no one is watching, when you choose integrity over convenience, when you choose discipline over indulgence, when you choose courage over comfort. And let me tell you something that may challenge you. Waiting for the world to improve before you improve yourself is backwards. The world improves when individuals do. Every era of chaos produces two kinds of PO. Those who become victims of the noise, and those who become leaders because they refuse to surrender their inner clarity. Leadership does not begin with authority. It begins with responsibility. It begins the moment you say, if this is broken, I will not contribute to the breakage. You may not control the economy, but you control your work ethic. You may not control the culture, but you control your character. You may not control the headlines, but you control the values you live by. And those small daily decisions compound over time. They build resilience, they build credibility, they build influence. That's how civilizations are rebuilt, not with grand speeches alone, but with ordinary people choosing to live extraordinary principles. Now, let's talk honestly. Taking responsibility is uncomfortable because it removes the luxury of blame. Once you accept that your response matters, you can no longer hide behind excuses. But that discomfort is also where power lives, because the moment you stop blaming, you start building. The moment you stop waiting, you start moving. The moment you stop complaining, you start creating. And creation, real creation, is the antidote to despair. People lose hope not because life is hard, but because they feel useless. Responsibility restores usefulness. It gives your suffering meaning. It turns pain into purpose. It transforms fear into fuel. And here's something we don't say often enough. Responsibility is contagious. When one person stands up, others begin to remember who they are. When one person refuses to compromise their values, it gives permission for others to do the same. You don't need millions, you need momentum. You don't need perfection, you need commitment. The Torah teaches that saving one life is like saving an entire world. Why? Because one life lived with responsibility creates ripples far beyond what the eye can see. Your family feels it, your community feels it, your generation feels it. So instead of asking, is the world about to end? Perhaps the more productive question is this the moment I finally begin? Begin to live deliberately, begin to think deeply, begin to act responsibly. Begin to align your actions with your highest values, because endings and beginnings often look the same from the outside. They are moments of uncertainty, moments of disruption, moments when the old no longer works and the new has not yet fully emerged. But those moments are sacred. They are invitations. They are asking something of you. And let me leave you with this thought, because it's simple, but it's powerful. The world does not end when things fall apart. The world ends when people give up on their responsibility to put things back together. So don't wait for clarity to act. Act, and clarity will follow. Don't wait for certainty to commit. Commit, and certainty will grow. The future is not written by those who predict it, but by those who prepare themselves to meet it with courage, discipline, and faith. The truth you can't ignore is this: the world doesn't need more fear. It needs more responsible human beings. And that work begins with you right now.